All right, so now that we've finished the bottom of the hole here, we still have a few strips to do on the shear line. So I've got this one-piece dry fit. I'll probably have about, I'd say 10 or 15 more strips to go to reach from here all the way down to the tip. And what we'll do is I've got a long strip here. It kind of almost goes to the midships of the canoe. We don't need any right here, so what we're going to do is put a long strip here. It covers the edge of this station and this station, but not this one. So the next one we put on will be shorter than this strip. So we'll add a shorter strip on under this one, then that will cover this station and most of this one. So then we'll need to get an even shorter one to cover those, and then shorter and shorter and shorter until we get to the end. So it'll look staggered, like steps coming down. And then once those are all dried, we'll take a batten and create a curve, and then we'll cut that curve out so that it's nice and smooth. All right, so I've got the same system I used before when going up the hole, but now it's all inverted. So I'm going upside down, and because I'm now working with these rounded bead edges, I can't use the bead wedges. So when I cut out those bead wedges, I kept the offcuts, which have cove edges, which will fit over these bead edges. So now I'll do the exact same thing I did before and just use those wedges. That'll tighten that up and clamp them in. So now that we have this side completely covered, all we need is to finish this side. All right, we are officially finished gluing all the strips, and it is an exciting day. Now, I know we've already celebrated our whiskey strip, but no one ever said we couldn't have 2 whiskey strips. So I'm going to celebrate with a little bit of rum, because I like rum. I like a little bit of sweetness. Nothing fancy, it's just Captain Morgan, but tastes good to me. So cheers. It's good. All right, so the next step is to prepare the stems. So what we got to do is shave the end grain on these planks that I kind of cut a little rough around this edge here. We'll shave all that down, make it nice and flush with the inner stem, and then we have to cut out a notch basically from here down to about here, and that's where the outer stem will kind of set into, kind of like mortise and tenon. The outer stem will sit inside and be enveloped by these planks. And then once that's glued in, we will shape it so that it is nice and fair with the rest of the canoe, and then sand the whole canoe down. Look at all these crazy glue spots, make it look a lot nicer. It'll look much better than it does now. And then it'll be ready for fiberglass. So Pretty exciting. It's going to be a lot of sanding. I'll probably do all that outside because it's going to be really messy. So here we go. I forgot to mention that we also have to cut the curvature out of the shear line on this side. I've already done the other side, and I'll show you guys how I did that right now. Okay, now that we've got our outer stem kind of laid on its place where it's going to be, I'm not going to leave this square. So what we actually need to do is taper the end of this outer stem. So I'm going to find the center point at this line and the center point at the end, and then we'll just cut out a taper, and then we'll lay it back on top of this and trace out our taper in the planks, and then create our mortise. We'll chisel that out so that this outer stem lays flush with the inner stem. So we're going to taper this to the end to about 3/8 inch thick. So we're not going to take off a whole lot, just enough to create a little bit nicer flow. Okay, so now I have to trace the edge of this outer stem onto the planks so that I can start cutting out the mortise and allow this outer stem to fit right in. Now, instead of using a pencil, I want to be a lot more precise with this outline, so I want to use this razor blade. Just make sure I'm all straight first, nice and centered, and then we'll make our cut. Okay, now that we've got the outer stem fit into its mortise, now we need to make sure it sits nice and flat over the inner stem. So you might be able to see there's a couple of gaps. You can see light coming through here and through here, all the way down till about here. So what that tells me is this area right here is a little proud, and I need to shave this section down a little bit so that here and all this section will lay a little bit flatter. So we'll take down the high spots here, and looks like there's one here as well. We'll do those two and then set this outer stem back on and see how that looks. All right, now that I've got a tight fit around that curve, I'm going to take this stem back off and drill a few pilot holes, about every 6 to 8 inches, all the way down, and then put it back on, drill some more pilot holes through that into the inner stem that are a little bit tighter, and then I'll get the epoxy ready and glue it up, and then I'll use those screws to clamp it down temporarily until the epoxy sets, and then I'll take the screws back out and we'll plug those holes up. Now I made this hole on the outer stem wider than the screw. I'm going to make the hole on the inner stem smaller, and the reason for that is it's easier to clamp this outer stem down onto that inner stem if you're not fighting against the threads on the screw. So if this is free to move inside this, it'll do a better downward pressure into that inner stem. Once all that epoxy is dry and set, we'll take these screws back out, and then I'll put some plugs in there that match the color and the grain of this mahogany. Make sure you only go as deep as the screw is, or you're going to pop it out through the inner stem. Okay, I'm going to try to get all of this on camera without messing up, Working with resin always makes me nervous. I feel like I don't have enough time, but I think we'll be fine. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna mix it up over there. We'll do just an unthickened clear epoxy first, because we need to kind of cover up this end grain. So we'll do a couple of layers of that, just clear on the end grain so that it soaks it up. Otherwise, if we just put the stem on without pre-coating this, that'll suck most of that glue up and it won't get a good bond. So we'll saturate this edge first, let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then we'll mix our wood dust in with the resin so that it kind of matches the color of the canoe instead of just having clear gaps if there are any showing. And then we'll put the stem on, and then I'll strap it to make it nice and tight before I put the screws in, and those screws will hold it in place. I'll take the straps off and then I'll get started on this end. So wish us luck. Also, one thing I've learned is if you have kids or a wife who loves applesauce, keep the little bowls that the applesauce comes in, because these are really handy for mixing small amounts of resin. I also eat a lot of yogurt, so I keep those. And then I didn't buy these. These actually came from a house that I cleaned out, so I figured I'd reuse them instead of throwing them away. And that keeps me from having to buy those really expensive measuring tubs. I know they're not as precise and they're a little harder to measure, but I'll use 2 identical pieces and find a line like right here and just fill it up to that line on one and this line on the other. So I've got resin and hardener, and these are just 1 part each, so that makes it easier to mix. Now, if I was having to do a 1-to-3 ratio or something like that with a different type of resin, then it might be a different story. But for this works just fine. These are also great for putting your wood sealer in if you just have to do little projects. If you've got a brush, just use that, put your sealer in there, and carry it around as you go. So it's cheap. It's actually free, so it saves you some money, and you get to reuse something instead of throwing it away. All right, while Addison is stirring the resin, I'm going to wax my screws so that I can pull them back out. So I'm just gonna put a little bit on there, or a lot on there. Nice and goopy. I don't want them to get stuck in the resin. We'll let that sit just a few minutes. While we do that, we're going to mix the wood dust in with the rest of the resin that we have. And then when it's ready, we'll put the outer stem on. So we want to get it to like a peanut butter consistency so it doesn't run. So we're going to need a lot more in there. So all of it, hurry. There we go. Perfect. these come out. Resin's all nice and solidified. It's been sitting for a couple of days now, so it should be pretty well cured. So I'm gonna take these out, hopefully. Oh, yeah. Cool. No problem at all. I'd say that's pretty stuck on there. Alright, I went ahead and shaped this end before I recorded doing it on the other end, just because I wanted to get familiar with using this block plane and figuring out the different angles and stuff I needed to do to get all this cut fair against the planking. So I'll come back down here and take all this down a little bit more with sandpaper. And that'll make that look much nicer, because obviously I've still got some resin goop I need to clear up. But I'm pretty happy with that. Looks pretty fair. It flows into the curvature of the canoe really well. So now we're going to do this end. What we want to do first is to shape the stem this way into the profile. That curvature right there. So what we're going to do is taper this end down into this curve right here. So we're not going to take any of this down. We're going to bring the stem to meet the curvature of the rest of the hull right here, which means we'll be taking it down quite a bit to get that to run fair. So it'll be thicker on this end, and then it comes down more narrow until it matches that. And once we do that, then we shape it this direction so that it matches the angle of the side of the hull. First we'll draw a center line down here. We'll make it about 3/8 inch thick, and then we'll shave away these corners with the plane. And I watched a video of Ted Moore's himself from Canoe Craft, and basically he was showing the method where you're basically just closing this gap over the planking. So right here where it meets the stem, we're going to take all this material off, and by basically touching the planking and running it along like in this direction, that'll be a much easier way to get it to run flat with the planking. Hope that makes sense. I'll show it in the video and you'll see how I do it. It actually ended up being a lot easier than I expected. I was a little nervous at first, but it turned out well, and it didn't take too long. A lot of elbow grease. My arms were definitely tired, but no, I'm happy. Well, I was gonna do the sanding outside, but it's super hot right now. We're in July, so it's hot and humid, and you know, if I can't enjoy it, then I'm just gonna rush through it, and I might make some mistakes. So it's gonna create a lot of dust, and it won't look as nice. I was trying to do it outside because I had a little bit better lighting, but I'd rather be comfortable while I'm working, so just have to do it in here. That's fine.
I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'm basically just making marks on the canoe just so I know where I have and have not sanded, so I don't sand too much and I don't miss a spot. So I'll start on one end and then make sure I basically erase all the marks that I just put on here, and that just do that much sanding, just enough to get the marks off so I don't go too deep in the wood.
Thank you.